All right, good morning, Nigeria. It's about to begin, of course, with the conversation proper, which is focused on the framework for state policing. But before we get into that, let's take this background report put together by Timothy Yusuf.
State policing is being touted as a solution to Nigeria's security challenges. Analysts on some reasons why there is a renewed call for it by the present administration say localized security, faster response times, community trust, decentralized security, and addressing specific threats are germane. Security experts believe that the renewed call for state policing is likely due to increasing security concerns and perceived inefficiencies in current federal policing structures. Consequently, the framework for state policing in Nigeria is currently being developed by a committee set up by the Inspector General of Police Olatunji Dusu. The committee, chaired by Professor Olu Ogunshakin, is tasked with reviewing existing policing models, assessing community security needs, and proposing an operational framework for state police structures. Some of the key areas the committee is focusing on are recruitment and training, resource allocation, accountability and oversight, and constitutional amendments with the National Assembly. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has expressed support for the establishment of state police, and the House of Representatives is considering a bill on the matter. For more information on the potential benefits and challenges of state policing in Nigeria, over now to our guest in the studio.
Thank you very much, Timothy Yusuf, for that background report. And joining us in the studio to discuss the issue of state policing is Professor Etanibi Alemika, a professor of criminology. Prof, it's good to have you join us on for this discussion.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
All right. Also with us in the studio is Dr. Charles Omole, a lawyer and also national security expert. He's also the DG, Institute for Police and Security Policy Research. Dr. Omole, it's good to have you join us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good morning, Nigeria.
Good morning.
All right, and we have also been joined from Jos by Sani Suleiman, who is a peace-building expert and former project lead of USAID-funded community initiative to promote peace in Kaduna, Plateau, Benue, and Kogi states. Commonwealth Professional Fellow in Diversity Management. We welcome you to Good Morning, Nigeria.
Morning, and thank you for having me.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. Let's just kickstart our conversation this morning by looking at the various scenarios that has led to the renewed clamor for the establishment of state police in the country. I mean, over the years, there have been, various committees set up to look into this issue, but the clamor has become more intense lately, largely because of the various insecurity and the crime rate in the country. Even the president also has given his voice, for the establishment of the state police. Prof, tell us, in your own perspective, what's the expedient for the state police now?
Well, let me start by also helping to distinguish the two concepts we use interchangeably, which are vastly different. State policing and state police. State policing is already in Nigeria vastly practiced.
Okay.
A state police that I think we're actually referring to most of the time we're talking about state policing. What's the difference? Police is an organization or an official of government responsible for law enforcement.
Okay.
Policing is all activities that are deliberately taken to ensure order. So police are not the only ones involved in policing. Vigilantes are involved in policing, family are involved, transmitting cultural values and the rest. They are involved in policing because they are, deliberately putting you in a situation to comply with norms and values and laws of society. So there are two, all the states do with respect to environmental, traffic, and the rest of them. They are policing. So the states are already involved in policing. Is not in existence is state police.
Okay.
So now we come to the state police. Historically, we had dual police system until 1966. As part of Decree 34 by Ironsi, this whole unitary government that he proposed under Decree 34, he set up a panel which was chaired by Gobri. I think Gobri was a permanent secretary in the North. And before the panel, the result was ready, of course, Ironsi had left office, had been in the second coup of July 29, 1966. So it was Gowon that received it. And, the report had very, very unpleasant things to say with local government, how they were abused by political authority, how in some places like in the North, in Benue State, what we call Benue today, where, the kind of atrocity in the 1962-64, in the South, how they were used almost like simultaneously with party talks, and they were documented. And he then said, the committee recommended they should merge. So they merged, but unfortunately, most of the period we've had until 1990 were under military. So the issue was not even raised. So it's since 1999, at different times, there have been agitation for state police. What are the drivers for this? The most consistent is actually the governance. If you're looking from 1999, the most consistent people who demand for state police had been the governors, who argue that in a federal system, all the layers of government ought to have police, just that they have lawmaking system, they have judicial system, and that's their argument all over. And they needed also, because they are called chief security officer, they needed a police that they control. Two problems here already. There is nowhere in the Constitution where the governors are called chief security officers. I think it's a calculation they put on themselves, burden they put on themselves. Then the second one about control. Police are not to be controlled by executive. Governors, whether president, should not control the police. And the fact that governors say they want to control police in Nigeria is just a mark of our own underdevelopment in that political culture. If you do that in other countries, you find a police rebellion in your hand. So, but they say this repeatedly, they want a police they control, the police they want to control. Over the years, it does make sense now from the point of governance. In states now, the only institution they don't control completely, is the police. And of course, DSS is not visible. So you find judiciary, which is I will come to this later, which is well protected. It's under the state government, it's just in the pocket of the governor. The legislature is in their pocket. So the major institution that is not in their pocket is state police. So they're consistent. But they always refer to Section 215, which at the end says, if the commissioner of police, more or less, I don't want to use the word confused, about directive, he should not obey. He should refer to the higher authorities. That is what they always use as far that they don't have control. But I'm not sure, I've not seen an instance in which there had been public complaint of a governor that says, I gave order to police, commissioner in my state, he didn't order except one. And I'm sure you recall Bishop and Nwobodo. This was a case in which Nwobodo, when he was governor of Anambra State, then the old Anambra, asked the commissioner of police to post particular officers to government house. The police commissioner at that time was Bishop. The name was Bishop. He has a EGT or something. And the commissioner said, I'm not going to do that, because usually there's what we call operational autonomy of the police. Okay. So they went to court, and that is the jurisprudence today. They went to court, and the court says, the commissioner of police has a duty to protect the governor, but the governor has no power to determine how he's going to do it and with who he's going to do it. So that is the jurisprudence today. So you can see in constitutionalism the balance between the police relationship and the governor. I've stretched this because we need to understand that, and even what is going on, how much might be, just that they are happy. Because the first express of public support for it was at NEC, where Tinubu, of course, in his manifesto and always talking about devolution. But that was the meeting where he asked the NEC to go and look at the possibility. There are other statements much later. So the governors have always been. In recent times, of course, insecurity had been a driver. And people think if you have state police, then they will contribute to either preventing the insecurity or solving the insecurity.
Or reducing it.
Reducing it. Unfortunately, that's where literature will disappoint you. There is no literature that supports that unitary police, centralized and decentralized police are different in terms of their performance or in terms of misconduct. In everything you want to measure police, there is no difference between centralized and decentralized. So the notion that there will be reduction in crime of insecurity is not going to be fulfilled. I think when Yusuf was talking about, he said there will be community trust. That is true, but it depends on the environment. For example, in the American history, especially during the civil rights, there was no way that the black trusted the local police in their community. Because even in Nigeria, under the NA, we just talk about local government, police in the southwest and NA in the north, there was no way that the local police was trusted by the community. I grew enough to know that in the northern Nigeria, the Maji, the treasurer, and the police people were the one who went to villages to collect taxes. There were taxes that were paid by community people. People don't come back from farm if they had not paid their taxes. They remain on the farm because they can't afford to pay their taxes. Of course, they have to be heavily, heavily entertained overnight by the chief of the village, just not to have trouble with them. So this question, are they trusted? Again, it depends on the level of democratization of the polity itself. It's not automatic. So that insecurity has been this thing. Again, where we need to be careful, we deploy military and ask police to leave the scene in order to clear the insecurity. That was 2009. Had that succeeded? If the military is unable to do it, how do you think the state police will do it?
All right, Prof, we'll get back into all of this in the course of the conversation, but let me quickly get to Dr. Omole. Now, Dr. Omole, the President Bola Tinubu, has called for a constitution amendment. He made this direct appeal to the legislators when he hosted them and said he wanted you to do this for him. From a legal standpoint, what exactly must change in the 1999 Constitution?
Thank you. Well, the body of laws that needs to change for you to have what you call effective state police is not just a constitution. Section 215, that the Prof quoted clearly needs to change. Section 214 talks about how there can only be one police in Nigeria. Of course, there are people who believe that the successive governments have broken that anyway, in the sense that if it barks like a dog, works like a dog, it's a dog. Like Prof was saying, in terms of policing, since 1975 onwards, after the coup that killed Muritala Mohammed, what I call the cannibalization of police started at that time, when the special branch was taken out of the police. Special branch became the NSO. The NSO became today's SSS, and then of course all kinds of organizations have now been carved out of the Nigerian police. So there is a school of thought that said all those organizations are technically unconstitutional because they are doing policing work. You know, so from EFCC to ICPC to Road Safety Corps to Civil Defense, they are all unconstitutional, technically speaking, because they are doing
products of the law.
But then you have to look at it. The Constitution is superior to the Establishment Act. That's why of all the security agencies, only the police is mentioned in the Constitution. You know, in terms of civil security, all those are products of National Assembly Act, which is subsidiary. Anyway, the point I'm making is here, so there is a need to change, and also the list, the schedule that lists what's exclusive, what's concurrent, will need to be changed to put police in the concurrent list. That's just the initial takeoff. Then there are a plethora of laws that now need to be changed, you know, or changed and written. Starting from the Police Act will need to be changed. It will now become Federal Police Act, because the states will have to have their own, you know, State Police Act. The Police Service Commission Establishment Act will have to change, because the states will need to have their own Police Service Commission. So the Police Service Commission for the federal will have to only deal with federal police, you know. And then there are some other laws that clearly needs to be created. That states things like minimum standards that states must have, you know, because the challenge, you know, a key lesson from what Prof have said is this: if we are to go back to what we scrapped, there was a reason we scrapped it. So it's not something we can just go back to without really learning the lessons of why we stopped it in the first place. Now, I'm sure for many Nigerians, what Prof said probably is new to them, because the way some people talk about state police, they think they talk as though we've never had it before. And I try to tell them, we've been here before. It didn't work, we scrapped it. So if we are going back to what we scrapped, I'm not saying we shouldn't go back, but then the safeguards needs to be there. Better safeguards need to be there to avoid all the mess that you know, and by the way, one of the things, collateral impact of, you know, the history that Prof gave, is that when they decided to merge the police, you know, a part of that expert panel, one of the things they found was not that there was a rot in the local local authority and native police. There was also a rot with local prisons at that time. So what they did was, when they merged the police, they also merged the prisons. So we now have one federal prison service, no more local prisons. So clearly, if you are, like I explained in one of my books, if you decide to go back to state police, by nature, states will have to establish their own prisons. The fact is that 90% of crimes in Nigeria are state crimes. So you can't, state police cannot arrest me, prosecute me, and send me to federal prison. It's not going to work.
They populate,
exactly, because the federal crimes will still exist, so federal prisons will always be needed. You know, since Buhari signed the constitutional amendment that allowed states to, you know, create their own prisons, name one state that have created one. None.
Because they don't want to spend the money.
It's responsibility. Now exactly, that's where that's the key.
And does not have power except there is a police to arrest him.
And the challenge, I feel, part of what I think the president is probably cleverly trying to do, I think, is he wants the governors to spend more on security. You know, and right now, it is true, lots of governors help fund police in their states, but they're doing it almost like a charitable, voluntary charitable donation. And with all the new money that states are getting, so maybe President has said, okay, put some money in this. So, but the challenge is a lot of governors do not understand the cost implication of having state police. Because the cost is not just the cost of policing, it's the cost of the entire criminal justice chain that we need to change. If marginal, I mean, there was an Oxford research about 10 years ago that says that only 12% of crimes in Nigeria are reported to the police. You know, I mean, it could even be less. So let's assume state police is effective and 25% of crimes are now reported to the police. That's millions more crime annually. That means in that state, I believe will be more prosecutors, more judges, more courts, more prisons.
Correctional centers.
More correctional centers. So all that we need to be created along with state police. So it's not just about having police alone. So all those collateral impact are states ready for that. And what happens to a state that can't afford it? How do we ascertain? How do we make sure that the governors don't get to a point where police are not paid, for example? Because we know that states that didn't pay their civil servants for a long time. So all those things will need to be codified in the law.
That's the thing of the past now, that they have more money at their disposal now.
Yes, but then what happens in 10 years' time? I mean, if we face another financial crisis. The point is that a lot of these conditionalities will need to be codified by the National Assembly in a sort of minimum standard act for state policing. That will have minimum standard of, even to the point of even training, that these are the minimum areas you must cover. Otherwise, what we're going to have states blighted by crime in this country because they can't afford. You know, the other thing about why that minimum standard is essential is that in 1952, when the action group, after they won the Western Region election, the minister for local government affairs at that time was one Honorable Obafemi Awolowo. One of the first things he did was he did a tour of all the local governments just to familiarize himself. One of the first things he found out was the complete variability of standards in terms of the local police. There was no uniformity at all. Even the ranking system in some of local government were different. So clearly, that tells us that if we are to have state police, we need to make sure certain minimum standards exist across the board. So yes, the president's sentiment is right. And one last thing I will say, why I think the president's sentiment is correct, is that the Nigeria police force, at least since 1999, have shown itself incapable of devolving police powers. Every management team of Nigerian police since 1999 have been against state police. Even when about 15 years ago, there was a program that was funded by the United Kingdom government called National Policing Program. One of the hallmarks of that program is community policing. They funded with over 20 million pounds over a 10-year period. All that was produced were just glossy documents. There was never community policing effectively. And the people that sabotaged it were people from within the Nigerian police itself, because they are wired to want to centralize power. So if you are faced with an institution like Nigerian police that do not want to devolve policing powers, then I think state police is an inevitable option. So that's why you see a situation where somebody is arrested in a village, particularly by a police in the state. The next thing you see, because he has contacts in Abuja, a call will be made, send the case to Abuja.
All right.
Why will you do that?
Okay.
So that centralization, the institution loves it. And therefore, state police, I think, should happen, but a lot of guardrails are needed.
A lot of gatherings are needed. Thank you very much, Dr. Omale, for that, your opening perspective there. Let's go to Jos now, where we have Sani Sulaiman. And Mr. Sulaiman, I believe that you have been following the discussion right here in the studio, and why there has been so much clamor for state police. And we want to get your perspective. What are the gaps that you have observed in the current, policing structure that makes, state police very essential at this point?
Thank you very much. And I think Professor and Doctor have laid a very strong ground for this conversation. And if we look at the current situation in Nigeria across all the different regions, the intensity with which insecurity is skyrocketing, incidences of communal conflict, crime and criminality activities, banditry, kidnapping, constitute a serious challenge in which one can safely say that the situation is overstretching the security agencies, particularly the police, and having a situation where military are heavily deployed, and even the military seems to be getting overstretched. Recently, we are seeing increase in targeting security formations and security personnel by criminal gangs, by insurgents, and so on and so forth. The need and the quest for Nigeria to really look at the broader security architecture in Nigeria and to strongly reform them to go in line with the demand of the current situation, give credence to the quest for state police. One of the fundamental issue and cry we hear from communities very often is the limitation and the inability of the current security system to respond timely and adequately to security challenges in communities. Very often we see that ability to gather intelligence, ability to receive early warning, and ability to quickly and timely respond is becoming more and more challenging to the security system in the country. And if we look at the discussion about having state police, one will have to look at it from different perspectives. Three key points that we must put into perspective is the issue of the political economy of having state police. And I think the guests in the studio also have pointed to those issues. And then also, what are the lessons that we can learn from the history of Nigeria, speaking from the experience of 1960 to 1966, and then also lessons we can learn from other federal countries, federal states that also practice dual police system at the federal and state level. The United States, which Professor Alemika has alluded to, of course, India, Canada, and others. If we look at the current situation in Nigeria, while on one hand, we talk about the necessity and the need for state policing, thinking that it can add to the personnel system, it can add to ability of police to have local knowledge and engage local people who have better knowledge of the communities and societies, who can better help in both intelligence gathering, in both identifying security issues and well responding to them. But then also looking at the key security challenges we are facing in the country. And I think if we look at it from the perspective of having a federal police to focus on issues that has to do with interstate policing, to look at issues that has to do with banditry, terrorism, and other things. And then we are having a local police at the state level that is focusing on intercommunal conflict, that is focusing on cases of robbery and other local crime issues. The thinking is that that will reduce burden on the federal police. It will increase local acceptance. But I think there are several concerns also that the system and the process must adequately look into. The perception of people, how they look at it from the way states can abuse state police politically, how possibly it is just to advance the cause of control, power, controlling of coercion, and using the police to serve the interests of those in power. But then on the other hand also, if we look at the issue of number of personnel, we look at the issue of having a system that is in tune with the reality of the challenges that community people are facing, then one will safely support that, okay, it is good to have a state police. But then on the other hand also, as it has been postulated, having state police in itself is not enough because we cannot have effective state police when the process of establishing them are not so adequate, are not so effective. We must talk about the issue of legislation that established them, the issue of responsibility, and the issue of coordination. State police cannot exist in isolation with the federal police, and the federal police cannot exist in isolation. And what are the point of divergence? And I think responsibilities of the executive arm, the legislature, as well as the judiciary. While we cannot talk about the judiciary because the system is still in the formative stage, it's at the legislative level. We are seeing what is happening at the federal legislative system. But then we still have a long way to go because it has to come to state houses of assembly and so on and so forth. And I think for me, the process, even at this initial stage, must ensure adequate process of citizens' government engagement, policy dialogue that really help community people to make input, to highlight their concerns and fears, and to also ensure that their perceptions, their concerns are adequately addressed. We are having a Nigeria today where communities have been deeply polarized. Communities have been deeply divided along issues of ethnicity, religion, and many a times crime and criminality are having coloration that has to do with ethnicity and religion. And we are having a situation where in some communities, crime and criminals are having cover of ethnicity and religion. Now, how do we deal with this issue in the process of having a state police? Who will be there? How will the recruitment happen? And who will be recruited? And then how will that process ensure inclusivity, ensure adequate process? We have begun to see some state governments already establishing advisory committees following in the footsteps of the police and the president. For example, in Plateau, the governor recently established a 14-man advisory committee on state police. And I think one of the quick observations seen from the committee, one, is that the governor has tried to make the committee some sort of inclusive based on the context, based on the reality of Plateau State. To what extent are the governors ready to truly and genuinely go beyond politics in terms of the process of either setting the committee that will be advising them or even allowing the State House of Assembly to have a process that adequately engage and factor the input of the communities and their concerns and all that. So,
right. Thank you, Sani. You know, just so that we take it step by step and not rush the entire conversation. We'll get back to you in the course of the conversation, but thank you for your opening remarks. Let me get back here in the studio and to Professor Alemika. Now, opponents of the creation of state police, one of the arguments they have put up is that the problem is not structure, but a poor policing culture. They've also identified funding. Sani alluded to, you know, the problems of ethnicity, the problems of religion in fighting crime. These are real issues. In your opinion, and from all that you have known, is state police likely to fix all of this?
No. No. You know, criminology is the discipline that attempts to explain crime. And in all textbooks, in all the theories of crime, there is nowhere the police feature as the cause of crime and insecurity. And if you want to fix a problem, you tackle the source, the causes. Causes of insecurity are economic, political, and social. I started, for example, and I said family does have a policing role. Many of us are generation. I'm sure when you were leaving home, your father said, "Don't spoil my name." And I was giving another year, I was talking to somebody, and I said, when my father told me some decades ago, he was until a few years ago when he was driven away from home by these herders. You know, a villager. He wasn't probably not known in the next village, but he thought his name was so important that going to Kaduna as a teenager shouldn't spoil it. That's policing. It has an element of policing. And of course, that governed the way I behave. The man wasn't expecting so much from me. Don't spoil my name. If it was difficult for you there, return home. We've lost that at that level of family. After family, religious and educational institution, you take the, extend the role of the family before you get into the wider society. We've lost most of these things. The man in JAMB cries every year how parents aid, people write, to cheat in exam and all those things. That's where it starts, those levels. Then you go to economic opportunities. People of my age, when we sit down and say, how did it happen? What is happening? It's so obvious why it happened. We went to universities when the environment was decent, everybody was accommodated, and therefore there's even a university culture of how you behave. In Ibadan, you couldn't go to this market, the Ibadan market, major market there, and as a student, eating corn or, eating this thing. There will be a magazine on campus that will bug you. But now that you have 80% of your students living off campus, of course, they didn't have, what you might call the enlightenment that university environment provides, because we've stopped developing. So once you destroy those educational system which contribute to policing, policing is learning to comply or complying with rules and norms and values of society. Once you erode it, you have problem. Then economic opportunities. Before you graduate, 3-4 companies are already, government is already issue you a letter of appointment. People graduate 12 years, they have no job. Then you talk political. Here you find everyone, if you're not associated with one political party, you can't get job, which is one of the saddest things in Nigeria today. The jobs are not competitive. This is where we are losing our youth. It's not that they're angry that they are not qualified, but they see people, they are far more qualified, get the job because a senator, a House of Rep person has his own list which supersedes competition. These are the things that are causing the crime, the anger you see in society. Then you find, I grew up as a teenager in Kaduna. It was unusual. People might say population difference. It was unusual to find Almajiri, and there were people who were, going through Islamic culture around those things to be wandering around the town. So causes of, crime is social, is political, and, political. That is where you tackle it. For example, the state, which state today has good general hospital? Because when you are saying exclusive and concurrent, there are many items that are fundamental to human security in Nigeria, which are already in the state: education, housing, healthcare. Which state actually pay attention to this today? No, tell me which one has one exceptional secondary school, like Kefi. Which one? Which one has good general hospital, where you'll be treated in those days for days without paying a farthing and you were fed? None. So because the state have failed in providing the things that make society safe, we are now finding the crimes that we have today. And more police will not solve that problem. The most decentralized police system in the world today is the US. US has the highest violence per 100,000. I think we can see the contradiction, and if you think it's just the decentralization. Yet, if you go to the Scandinavian and Nordic countries, that's countries like Denmark, Sweden, Finland, you don't pick any of times, economies, and see crimes, of violence in those places, because the economic system guarantee opportunity for decent living through a lifetime. So the police in itself does not. If you have these ones, like the Scandinavian country, the role of the police is actually social work. They are helping you to look for your dog. They are helping you to look for your dog, or you are drunk and you can't remember they take you home. That's what major work of police do in countries that have good political economy. You know, our colleagues on the line talk about political economy. So what state police will do in the end, I hope, is not. It might actually extend repression that is not intense by the federal police to local level. That's localized repression that we may get. So voice that people can still, try to express now will not happen. At political level, who can criticize seriously his state government and live with that state within 24 hours? I mean, today, your governor, you give him a very serious criticism, the way we criticize the president. If you do that to your state governor, you must leave that state overnight. Talks will attack you. So then they will have a formal instrument to arrest you, to detain you, and do whatever they want. So that's the problem. What can a state do? Because I think there are examples, even in federal, because the strongest argument for me is actually that the federal system had multi-layer police. But even in the federal system, the police is not structured the same way. In US, over 37,000 different police agencies, from three-man police, three-man sheriff in the village, to big ones like FBI. But the immediate neighbor, which is important, immediate neighbor Canada has, I think, 8 provinces. The constitution of the Canada allows you to have state police, a provincial police, which we are calling state police, for example. What has happened is that majority of the state did not establish police force. They contracted it to the federal police. So when you talk about federal system, because I hear, and unfortunately this comes from intellectuals, professors of political science. Oh, federal system demand. Yes, it happens, but they are not structured in those federal systems in the way. And I think you then see Britain. For example, Britain is a unitary system, if you like, but it has about 43 police forces. It used to, just in 1940s, there were more than 100. They shrink to 43. In 2000s, around 2006, 2008, there was strong pressure to actually reduce them, to collapse them to provincial. The world tendency today is more toward concentration, rather the concentration. Netherlands woke up one day and marched all its police forces. So we should not just, I think the driving force, let's not deceive ourselves, is immediately Tinubu says, I'm in support of state police. Everybody decamp to that opinion. Just fall in line. Yeah, everybody decamp, just like people decamp from political parties. Once the president say, everybody decamp to that opinion. But we need to be careful. Okay. We need constitutional amendment that first, what state police can do.
The role of the state
yes.
police. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Prof. You have raised, germane issues here that we need to solve our social, political, and economic problems. And that is where we should go and we should focus on, and not really state police. Dr. Omole, earlier on, you talked about the issue of, funding for the police, which always is a thorny issue. And when we are talking about these state police now, what mix of federal allocation or state budget or oversight can, keep the state police that we want to create now functional?
Okay. There are different models,
yes.
All over the world. I mean, if we go back to the United States that Prof was talking about, even though it's a completely devolved policing environment, an estate can have their own police in the US. There are minimum standards. That's number one. Number two, there are opportunities for local police to apply for federal funding. So in my book on state police, I talked about there's a need for equalization fund, some form of equalization fund. which I said the current police trust fund could be collapsed to become the equalization fund. And the whole idea of the equalization fund and the matrix of how it's going to be measured, how things will be measured, actually is in the book. And what that means is that, you know, states don't have the same economic power, so to speak. So a state like Lagos might be able to have the resources it needs to employ, but some other states may not. So they need the opportunity to be able to apply, you know, federal funding, you know, for different things. Now, talking about state police, you know, one of the things about the old local native police is actually in the 60s, in the early 60s, after independence, a lot of them actually were not armed with lethal weapons. You know, so the question you ask yourself is that if they were that bad without lethal weapons, what would they have been if they were allowed to carry lethal weapons? So part of the whole specification has to be what kind of weapons will state police be allowed to carry? Okay. You know, that's very, very important.
It's a big question.
It's a big question. Also, in terms of the composition of state police. Now, are you using state of indigenship, or are you using state of birth or of residence? Because the truth is, an Hausa man that's born in Ibadan and is, say, 25 years old will know more about Ibadan than an Oyo State indigene who lived in Kano all his life. So you are not telling me that Oyo State indigene from Kano will know the community better in Ibadan? Of course not. You know, so there are issues here. Then there are also issues of federal character. What I mean by that is the way the Nigerian police force recruits, you have to recruit from every state. That, in terms of the minimum standard that the law codifies, it has to replicate that at state level. What do I mean? Let me take, say, Kwara State as an example. I'm not from Kwara, but just a story for illustration. Part of the qualms of many people in Kwara is that since 1999, all their governors are from Ilorin. But Ilorin is not the only town in Kwara State. So, or far, all the rest of them feel left out, and they feel development is concentrated in Ilorin. So you now have a 10,000 man police force in Kwara, 99% are from Ilorin. Yeah. How do you think that will play in terms of community cohesion? So part of what
Dr. Mole, just a moment, please. We just want to remind our viewers that you can also contribute to the discussion by sending in your questions and comments on the number that is displayed on your screen. Just send your text messages through WhatsApp. Questions, you want to comment, you can send it to us. Thank you. Okay, Dr. Mole, you can continue, please.
Yes, so which means the law has to say if you want to establish state police, every local government must be represented, every ethnic composition in the state must be represented. So I think the way we can avoid, one of the ways we can avoid the mistakes of the past, because is that we have to make sure we don't leave things to the discretion of governors. A lot of things have to be specified in black letter law. Otherwise, we are going to have problems. You know, so part of, for example, the old thing, for example, even the ranking system, it has to be codified. So an inspector in Oyo State should be the same level as inspector in Kogi State. You know, because there will be things like secondments and, you know, joint task forces, for example, you know, and you don't want confusion when one inspector here is equivalent to ASP in another state. So to avoid all those things that happen, because what happened in the you know, colonial experience is that they were just left by and large to do their thing. You know, and that's where the different standards.
So they operated independently.
Exactly. That's where the, you know, variation in standards started. You know, but if we are to go ahead with state police here, everything needs to be specified in black letter law so that there's no lacuna anywhere about what can be done, what cannot be done. You know, and also there has to be a lot of expectation management. Like Prof said, state policing in itself, or state police in itself, will not solve, it's not a magic wand. You know, but it has to go hand in hand with so many things. So in terms of funding, states currently have security votes, but the governors have. You know, so clearly, it's one of those funds that nobody knows how they spend it.
That they enjoy.
So they probably will have to spend a bit more now out of that on the
Coordinated.
Yes. I know some states have, I know Lagos, I know Niger, I know some states have some form of security trust fund, in their states that raises money. So that clearly is another way states can raise money. They're clear that be funding from international partners. And then, like I said, there needs to be some form of equalization fund established by the federal government to financially intervene and support states that are deficient in certain areas, necessary. When necessary. So it's going to be a whole of nation.
But do state governors, have you seen that state governors are really interested? Because if they are not, I'm not sure where we are headed. For instance, the summit on state police that was organized by the House of Representatives, I don't remember a single governor attending. I don't remember one.
Yes, I remember that summit. It's a different, the question has to be how widely consultative was the summit.
They were invited, but they did not attend, not one.
That's the issue of, just like Prof said the other time, there must be engagement, citizens, government, and governors' engagement on this issue. But earlier on, you talked about the issue of, how police should, relate with other government agencies like the EFCC, ICPC, DSS, and all that. Now, with the creation of the state police now, how will they be able to relate with the DSS, ICPC, EFCC, and all that?
Actually, again, referring to that, that's the old chapter
Yes.
I actually did on this.
Yes.
Now, you see, part of the challenge at the moment is the fact that the easiest thing to say, if we are going with the spirit of Oronso, is to rationalize these, agencies. You have a Federal Road Safety Corps that, now are restricted to operate only on federal roads. Federal roads are only 14% of our road network in Nigeria. So you have a whole agency just managing 14% of our roads. So the question as to whether they should exist as independent outfits. But I said, trying to talk about rationalization at the moment will confuse the discussion. So I said what needs to be done if we are going towards the route of state police is there needs to be a clearer delineation of what can be done, what cannot be done.
Okay.
Right now, you see ICPC writing to somebody who owns a private club saying they want to check his books. One of them even contacted me recently. I had to, reach out to a contact in ICPC that when did ICPC have, stuff to do with private? Because what happens in Nigeria is that people shop for any law enforcement agency they have contact in, and as a result, they overreach. You have the EFCC, that have become largely debt collectors for private people. You see people owing they are owing me 5 million naira. I call EFCC on you. EFCC was not set up for things like that. EFCC was set up in the color of what they call serious organized crime agency, which deals with large, complex interjurisdictional financial crimes. But these days, somebody's owing me 5 million. I call EFCC. So every law enforcement is overreaching. And if we have to have state police to that, sort of port, it's going to be a mess. So there needs to be clear delineation. For example, even in Kogi State, people I was talking about, many years ago, civil defense took police to court, saying that police is encroaching on their duties. That case went up to the Court of Appeal, which now told the civil defense that police can pretty much do what they like.
So there must be delineation.
So that shows you what I'm telling you about this tough war.
All right, we'll get to all of these because we have to pause here and take a break. When we return, we'll continue this conversation. Please take it to the next stage and see where we find ourselves. Please don't go away. We'll be right back. All right, many thanks for staying with us. We are now getting to the final stretch of this conversation on the framework for state police in Nigeria. I'll get back to Jos now, where we have Sani Suleiman, and I'm wondering, in places you are there in Jos, in places like Jos, where you are, the North Central, the communal conflicts are very much common. Would you say that the state police could help prevent escalation in cases like this?
That will largely depend on how well the process and how thorough it is in terms of the legal, the institutional, and the operational system put in place. One thing that I look at when we discuss about state policing, instead of having a state police that is seen as a body that can do magic and entirely address the problem, I see it as a properly and well established, it can enhance early warning and early response system. It can enhance engagement with communities, promoting reconciliatory process, promoting, instead of promoting restorative process, and working with communities as part of it. When we look at the intercommunal conflict that we are having, it has increasingly become intertwined with crime and criminality. And a lot of time, whether we talk of farmer-herder conflict, where issues of cattle rustling, farm destruction, or we even talk of cases that has to do with election-related conflict and violence, we talk of other form of communal conflict. One key strong issue from the community is the inability of the security apparatus to, one, receive timely intelligence, analyze it properly, and act timely. So the major gap is that of early response, timely response. And I think if we look at it from that angle, and I think if thorough work is done to ensure that the role and responsibility of the state police is crafted and defined not to be an alternative to the federal police, but to be an institution that can really support and enhance that process of early warning and early response, taking preventive measures that can prevent the escalation of conflict issues and support the process of alternative dispute resolutions, then I think it can contribute effectively in minimizing and reducing especially the escalation of intercommunal conflict that often escalated and turned violent. That having said, the communities, for example, in Plateau and several other communities, we have seen situations where one section of communities along the conflict line will tell you they prefer to see the soldiers deployed as a protection or as a intervention on attacks and other things. Another section of the community will tell you they will prefer to see police. And even in the midst of those operations, we have often seen interagency dispute, interagency rivalry, interagency clash, where we see argument between one security agency and the other. They are all federal. And we see lack of sharing information, lack of synergy, coordination. Now, if we have state police, to what extent can the system ensure that the state police work in synergy and coordination with the federal police and even other security agencies that are already there? For example, in Plateau, we have the Operation Safe Haven, which has recently been renamed. And in that Operation Safe Haven, you have the military, you have the civil defense, you have the police, the federal police, and all that. And then now, if we have state police, how can that key into those systems? And how can they effectively work with trust, with collaboration, effective one? And so my submission on this is this process since that is the direction that both the president, the governors, and of course, even the National Assembly seems to be going, is that the preliminary process must ensure that effective policy dialogue take place where communities who knows where the shoes pinches, who understand the context and the issues that affect them across all conflict fault line are adequately engaged to make input into the process state by state to ensure that whatever policy framework is being put in place, it adequately addresses the concern and fears of communities around the political economy of state police, around the other social issues that has been highlighted, about the entrenched systemic and structural issues that are feeding into those communal conflicts. What do we do with the issue of indigenous satellite divide? How do we effectively address it as we process through developing state police? Because we need everybody, irrespective of his status, to key in and contribute effectively in sharing information, in supporting the process. And then who do we recruit? The process of the recruitment and training matters. And I think Dr. Omole highlighted that point. And that must be clearly defined.
All right, must be clearly defined, effective policy, discussion also must go hand in hand. Sorry, we have to just cut you short there because of time. We already have questions and comments from our viewers which would like to read out so that our guests can respond to them. Let me read out some of the ones that I have now so that Prof can respond to some of these ones here. This one is from Musa Afemia, Greenwall Observers, Kano. He said, does the shift to state police strengthen or would it replace existing community policing partnership with the Nigerian police force? Well, that's his question. There's Christ Simon. He says, good morning, presenters, good morning, guests in the studio. It's quite an interesting discussion. The high rate of security threats in the country is quite alarming. It's time for government at all levels to step in. If state policing is the way out, so let's do it. This is from... No, this one is, has no name. Just said, good morning. State policing, from my perspective, is going to be more harm, is going to do more harm than good to our dear country. It won't stand the test of time. Prof has said it all. We can't try solving problems by creating more problem. Okay, this is from Chi Tola. She says, yes, Nigeria should adopt state policing, but with strong constitutional safeguards to prevent political abuse. A key protection should be a constitutional clause that prevents state governors from directly commanding operational deployment of state police. Instead, the state police commissioner should maintain full operational autonomy while the governor provides only broad policy direction. This structure would allow state police to respond effectively to local security challenges while protecting the force from being used as a political tool. This one says, good morning. Please take time to review the terms of reference of the IG's committee. You know, the IG set up a committee to look into state police. All these issues raised by our guest are clearly captured therein. Let's not major in the minor. Obviously, none of them has seen the terms of reference. If they had, they would have highlighted topics that are not in it. Prof, you want to respond to some of these comments?
Maybe we start from the last. I think it's not correct that we have not seen the terms of reference.
Yes.
Actually, even in the terminology, the whole problem, I think the approach of the police, even the IGP, should have been how should the Nigeria police anticipate and respond to the establishment of of state police, not providing framework for state police, which is the focus. So I think he himself is not familiar with the yes, all the underlying semantics. You know, I don't think you can't. It's not your business to provide the framework. That's the National Assembly responsibility. But how would that affect the federal, the Nigeria police force? That should be the approach. The next thing somebody said, constitution. People have mentioned constitution. I agree. I think what constitution says, what is our constitution? Chapter 1 and 2, for me, is the basis for Nigeria. Once you take 4, once you take 1, 2, 4, and maybe the third that talk about citizenship, you don't have Nigeria. What is our core values that is in chapter 1? It talks about national unity and its indissolubility. It talks about social justice. It talks about democracy. It talks in chapter 7, section 7. It talks about local government, and then 10, section 10 of chapter 1. It talks about non-involvement of the state in religion. These are the foundation of the country. So a constitution must say, look, a state police must not act in a way that will endanger those values in chapter 1.
All right.
That should be the constitutional framework. It lists those ones. If you look at section 5 of the chapter 1, there's actually a phrase there which needs to be expanded for state police, which, if you summarize it, like the state government must not do anything that undermine national interest. In section, I think in section 5 or section 6. So those ones must be explicitly stated at the level of the Constitution. Then the Constitution, many of the things that Dr. Omole was talking about, standard and all those things, it will go further to say the Constitution can make laws to regulate the operation of police forces. So you find the ones that are constitutional provision, and you find those ones that will be dealt with under the purview of laws of the National Assembly.
All right.
That would be the minimum. But my fear is we have all safeguards about government not undermining judiciary, of not undermining legislature, not undermining SIEC. They are undermining it. What with impunity?
All right.
Why would that of the police be different?
All right. We have a lot more comments and questions so that we can take response from Dr. Omole and then get to just before we round off this conversation. Now, given Nigeria's growing security challenges, the establishment of state police should be considered as a complementary system to the Nigeria Police Force. This requires constitutional amendments to clearly define the roles of federal and state police. Federal police should handle national and interstate crimes, while state police focuses on local security and community policing. There must also be uniform recruitment standards, proper funding by state governments, and strong oversight mechanisms to prevent political misuse. If properly structured, state police can strengthen grassroots security and improve rapid response to crime across Nigeria. That's from Mohammed Isa in Kotunkarfe, Kogi State. All right, this one is from Akeju Olagbaju. One important issue that is overlooked in the framework is the external conflicts between states' police and their border states, especially if they are governed by different parties or have different political interests. Okay, thank you. And this other one is from Nandom Wuyep in Jos. I think state police would foster greater community trust, reduce the burden on federal forces, create local jobs, enhance local knowledge for better intelligence, faster response times to emergencies, and ensure direct accountability. However, while policing is less about institutional form and more about institutional character, will the state police be fully controlled by state governments, or should it have independent accountability mechanisms to prevent misuse? He says, thank you for your service, and God bless Nigeria. And finally, from Damilare in Lagos, he says the conversation is quite incisive and writes, in terms of governance and oversight mechanisms, how would state police be governed and held accountable to prevent state police from becoming instruments of political intimidation? Dr. Omole, quick response, please, before we get to Jos.
Well, I think the way I look at it is this. If Nigeria police culture or policing culture is not changed, and we simply just gave or devolved just accuracy state police, we are just democratizing the problem. So I think hand in hand with state policing has to be some form of policing reform in Nigeria. How policing is done. And I hear what Prof said, because it is true that sometimes we have things on paper. I mean, take the Police Act, for example, of 2020. Our public can say, I'm giving a paper on it next week at a seminar. Our public will say about 70% of its provisions, there are no regulations to back it up. It's there on paper. For example, one element we probably be very aware about, in the Police Act, it said number one duty of every IGP, number one, this is actually first, must be to produce a national policing plan before each financial year ends. No idea has done that. Not one.
They're not interested.
But it is in law. It is in the law. But nobody is doing it, and nobody is asking the question. So I understand those who have the fear that yes, we can even codify these things, But the question is, who checks it? And I think that is probably the issue here. So which means when we are putting it, and one of the ways is what Prof have said, which is the National Assembly must be given the powers within the constitutional change to intervene and make laws to regulate the operations of state police.
All right. Okay. All right.
So that would be the overarching accountability check.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Omole. As we begin to just wind up this conversation, let's go to Jos and get Mr. Sulaiman. Earlier on, you talked about the inter-ethnic tensions, that the police need to also work on. Now, in terms of state police, how would you say they should, if we have state police, how would they handle inter-ethnic, tensions and create a kind of public trust? Because I know that that's one major issue that is also negating the status of the police, the issue of public trust.
2 minutes. Go around up.
The process of establishing the state police must from onset be people-oriented. The people must be allowed and be encouraged to take full part of the process, devoid of any politicization. The people must contribute to the process of formulating the policy framework for the state police, if we are to have it. That give a sense of ownership and give a sense of belonging, and that can go a long way in addressing both real and perception of fear that people have, and people can trust the system which they believe they own. And then the oversight system must also be transparent and be strong. The state police must not be operate in isolation, and that is why I earlier postulated that the framework, the institutional setting of the state police must have an element of alternative dispute resolution, must have element of reconciliation, must have strong element of early warning and early response, and by so doing, it makes the community to really key in and own it and support it to succeed. Otherwise, it will face a lot of challenges and it may not be able. As I said, already we are hearing a lot of suspicion and mistrust. Some people will say, we don't trust the Nigerian police, we don't trust the military, we prefer this, we prefer that. So that can also happen with the state police because different interests, different perception, different. So the process must ensure adequate legal framework, adequate definition of roles and responsibilities, must define the power of the state police and ensure that the people own it and are part of it.
All right. Thank you very much for your final contributions there. Let me thank Sani Suleiman, who is a peace-building expert and former project lead of USAID-funded community initiative to promote peace in Kaduna, Plateau, Benue, and Kogi states. He is also a Commonwealth Professional Fellow in Diversity Management and joined us from our Jos studio. Thank you very much for your time and your perspectives on Good Morning Nigeria today. Thank here in the studio Dr. Charles Omole, who is a lawyer, national security expert, and DG, Institute for Police and Security Policy Research. We thank you very much for coming on the program, and thank you for your time. And finally, but by no means the least, let me appreciate Professor Etanibi Adlemika, a professor of criminology. We appreciate your time, sir.
Thanks so much.
Your contributions.
Thank you.
And that's Good Morning Nigeria for this Monday. Of course, we have a lot more to come within the week. We hope that you join us again tomorrow. I am Victor Azo. Bye-bye.
And I'm Ademola. Do have a lovely day.